Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for another installment of my Meet the Artist interview series, where I'm talking with some of my favorite writers and content creators. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by the writer and the content creator, Amie McNee.
I'm so grateful to be here, guys. So honored.
Yeah, we have so much to talk about. And today's class is really dedicated to the idea of trusting the inner artist over the inner critic. Because everyone who's here is a writer or a creator in some way, shape, or form. That's why you're here. That's why you were nice enough to pre-order my new book, which is going to be out in 4 days. So I'm super excited about that. And one of the main things about being a creator is dealing with these conflicting voices that we all have inside of us. That the inner artist, or I also call that the inner child. This is just our nature. I think our nature really is to create. I think it's human nature. I think it's the nature of every child. And then, as we get older, as the pressures of society enter in, we get so many distractions, and it becomes harder and harder to listen to that inner voice of the inner child and the inner artist. And the inner critic starts to take a bigger role in our daily lives, and we start to doubt ourselves and to judge ourselves. And it's so important, if you want to be a creator of any sort, to be able to trust that inner child, that inner artist, regardless of the inner critic. So I want to start by reading a section of The Art of You. I finally got the real copies. I can't wait for you all to get this. It's like full color illustrations and lots of chapters on different stages of the creative process. But along this topic, there is a chapter called The Myth of Perfection. And this is a section in that chapter called Real is Better Than Perfect. One of the biggest roadblocks for creatives is the daunting pursuit of perfection. We often put unnecessary pressure on ourselves to live up to ideals that only exist inside our heads. This pressure manifests as all sorts of negative inner dialogue. I'm not good enough. Someone else does it better. I don't have the proper training. I'm too critical of my own work. I'm afraid of getting bad feedback. What if they laugh at me? As creatives, we can be our own biggest critics. The desire for approval and perfection can be daunting. But how do we measure perfection? Who decides what is perfect? We sometimes call great art perfect in hindsight, but the process of making art, just like the process of life, is never perfect. Art is an act of spontaneity, not overanalysis. Art is messy. Art is experimentation. Art is curiosity looking for trouble and fun. During the moment of creation, it's best not to worry about the end result. You're not looking for a final solution. You're going on a journey. You're looking to discover something inside yourself. Never aim for external standards of perfection. The pursuit of perfection will only weigh you down. Instead, aim for discovery. Aim for play. Aim for freedom from the inner critic who says you must be perfect. Art and creativity are a matter of subjective taste. Some people hear perfection in the raw guitar chords of punk rock music. Some prefer the sloppy brushstrokes of abstract expressionism over polished realism. Poetry that speaks in emotive fragments can be more impactful than highly technical, grammatically correct stanzas. Often, the most successful business people are those who let down their guard and reveal their human side, despite pressure to conform to a stubborn idea of professionalism. What one person perceives as messy, another person will find inspirational. Being real is better than being perfect. So, with that, I'm going to invite onto the stage Amie McNee. One second here. All right, Amie, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, like I'm just so honored and so excited about this book, James. Like just listening to that, I felt like 100 different ideas come off of it. It's so exciting.
so I want to start by just learning a little bit more about your own creative process. You are a fiction writer who's written a couple historical fiction novels,
Mhm.
and you also are a creativity coach and teacher. And
Mhm.
your Instagram page, Inspired to Write, is filled with inspiration for writers and creators. So you are a full-time and dedicated writer and creative, and I just want to learn about some of your journey and how you got here. What is your first memory of being creative?
Oh, what a juicy question. And thank you, James, for like seeing me. And I feel so beautiful to have my story told back at me and to be called an author by others and to even just have the word full-time writer said out loud. You know, I've been able to be a full-time writer now for maybe 4 or 5 years, but it has been the greatest privilege and pleasure. So thank you for seeing me. The first time I felt creative, like it was innate, as it is innate in all children. And I have memories of telling stories and writing stories from a very, very young age. I loved storytelling. And I think even now, as I think about what I want to do and what I want to create, a lot of it comes back just to storytelling. It might not always be with words on the page. It might be, you know, with my voice or acting or even imagery. Like I just love the process of telling stories and being involved in stories and being a consumer of stories. And so I feel like I've seen that in myself since I was so little, like constantly making up narratives and living in make-believe worlds. And I've always had that call. I wanted to act for a really long time, but I ended up returning again and again to the words on the page. And all I wanted to do was tell stories. And as I left, education, and I was like, okay, I've got to grow up now. I've been obsessed with stories for so long, but like now it's time. Everyone's getting real jobs. I've got to grow up. And I went into the corporate world and I was like absolutely smothered. I was trying to write on the side, but I was like, how could this be? Like, is this what being an adult is? Is this what growing up looks like? And I found it incredibly hard. And I got really, really depressed in office work. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try personal training. So I became qualified to become a personal trainer and I was working with people one-on-one. And I was like, still, like, all I want to do is be in my own worlds and be creating. And like, is this all that I have to do with my life as an adult? And so I went through just the most ridiculous amount of jobs, desperately trying to find what my version of adulthood could look like. And the beautiful thing was that I came around circle and realized that I could be an adult who made art, and I could be an adult who was a writer, and I could be a very responsible, fully grown person and be telling stories with my life. And that was a very long journey, very, very distilled in those words, because there was a lot of pain and a lot of shame, a lot of shame. I felt so embarrassed that I was so dedicated to wanting to create with my life, and so embarrassed that I struggled so hard in what everybody else seemed to be perfectly fine with this corporate world, with all these, you know, slightly more normal jobs. And I was like, why can't I just cope? But I couldn't. And I'm so grateful for the fact that I couldn't, because it meant that I chased what I wanted really hard. And now I'm so grateful that I've been creating, writing, connecting, making full time with my life for the last few years.
That's so beautiful, and that so resonates with my own journey and probably the journey of
Yeah.
so many artists and creators. What did your corporate life look like? What were you attempting to to do to be an adult and to be
Yeah.
professional?
It's so unbelievably funny reflecting back on it now, because it's like the antithesis of who I am. I was working in finance, which again, I cannot tell you how funny that is. Um, and I was an EA for like some high up dude in the finance sector. And I was so bad, so bad. I used to come into work in my pajamas. I think I was unconsciously trying to get fired. And I just like every cell, like, I would basically disassociate from 9 to 5 each day. I would bring my stories and bring my books and be like, let's try and create in the downtimes, because I actually didn't have a huge amount of work to do. I was really, they put me at the table because they thought they needed an executive assistant. And I was like, that's cool. Like, I'll write my stories in between time. But I was dealing with so much shame, and I was dealing with a lot of narratives about how embarrassing it was that I longed for this childlike life, that I was unwell. Like, I was disassociating all day. Like, I couldn't function, couldn't feel, was very, very numb. And then, what's funny was I had the courage to quit, and then I started trying to look again in marketing or in publishing. I tried to get, like adjacent jobs, what Julia Cameron calls shadow careers, like close enough to the art, but in a more responsible, looking more corporate way. Like, I'd have to wear a suit, which would make it more acceptable. And again, these jobs, first of all, it was so hard for me to get a job in those spaces. And I was fighting so hard for something I desperately didn't want, which was a very interesting dissonance that I had to navigate. And then I ended up waitressing because I just gave up, and I waitressed and was a terrible waitress. Again, like all these jobs I just sucked so much at. Got in a lot of trouble again for wearing slippers to work, to the point where he said, you have to leave. You can't
Wow.
be showing up like this. And that was when I decided, well, fuck this. I'm so fucking tired of trying to be someone that I'm not. I'm so tired of fighting for a life that I do not want. I'm going to try and work for myself. And that was the last time I had a job outside of me being my own boss.
Wow. Yeah, I remember it brings back memories for me of even back since high school. Like I grew up in a very small town
Mm.
in Minnesota, and like I was always working odd jobs, just because I had to. I was working in, grocery stores and like things like that. And I
Mm.
remember I would keep a notebook in my pocket, and I would go in the bathroom and hide out and write poems in my notebook. Or I would think I would be like out on this floor and I'd be thinking of poems in my head. And then at a certain point, I'd go into the bathroom and write them down. So I'm like
I just
hiding my
love
poetry at the
us.
grocery store.
I just love us so much. I just have this like unbelievable, like unsatiated love for creatives, because the way that we fit our art around the lives that we sometimes just have to leave is so beautiful. And it's just so hard to deny the calling to create. Like, it wells up wherever we are, whether it's at the grocery store or whether it's, in corporate life. Like, we know what we're here to do.
Totally. Yeah. And even I went to a regular college at first, and literally I couldn't even make it through a semester. Like the only class I
Mm.
finished that semester was a poetry class. And the rest I just stopped going because I just couldn't do it. I couldn't sit there. I just felt like I was becoming just like a cog.
Yeah.
And so I dropped out, and I started by I was just moving across the country and like working odd jobs and just writing and painting. And
So
and
beautiful.
it was that was very freeing, but I also didn't have any direction in that year either. So I finally decided, like, okay, I need to get my life sort of back on track. I need to have some kind of a direction. So I decided art school, and I ended
Mm.
up going to a design college. And
How was it?
it was good because all the homework was just doing stuff, making stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my whole life I've always balanced the writing and with visual design. So I
Cool.
learned a lot about, visual design and learning computer programs, which I now use for memes and for all kinds of stuff,
Yes,
right?
that's so
So
cool.
it was great to just learn how to apply my creativity towards like problem solving and towards something that did have like like economic value, is like being a
Yeah.
designer. So when I went into the corporate wilderness,
Yes.
I was lucky enough to be in a creative profession first as a graphic designer, and then I switched to being a brand strategist. So I spent many
Mm.
years being a brand strategist. So my job by nature was creative, but
Mm.
still there's still
No,
something about it, like it doesn't it doesn't scratch the itch of like
Mm.
expressing your soul in the way that
And you know what?
that I needed
I feel
to.
like yes, and I also feel like I speak to so many creatives who are like, I'm in a really creative job, but like, why aren't I content? And something that I think is really hard is creative jobs often steal the creative juices for your
Totally.
artwork that you want to
Total,
do back home.
totally.
And so you can feel like you're being robbed of the energy that you really want to put into your own creativity. So I think even when we do have those really creative adjacent or very creative jobs, we can still feel incredibly resentful because they take the energy that we want to put into our own personal creativity, which can be so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm lucky that, you know, a lot of the skills that I developed during those years are things that I still use now. Just like because my job was to like make
Yes.
presentations and give
Yeah, incredible.
presentations. So like the public speaking and, you know, if I'm teaching a class and I will often put together these presentations, I was doing that for years as my job. So I,
Mm.
even though the job itself didn't resonate and it didn't scratch, you know,
It
the true
served.
creative itch, it taught me some skills that I still use now. I'm wondering how, like, what was it like to, how did you finally make that jump? Because for me, I was working in advertising up until about 3 years ago, and I finally
Mm.
had to get fired because,
Yeah.
you know, I was comfortable enough doing that where like I wouldn't have quit because I just needed the money to support myself, and I was making memes, and I was like, I'd already published some books, but I wasn't making money off of my
Mm.
art. And it was such a blessing that they finally let me go. And, you know, it was painful in the moment. But to be
Yeah.
perfectly honest, and for everyone here, it was in the days after finally getting fired from my advertising job. And I knew like, okay, this is it. I am not going to look for another job. I'm going to see this as an opportunity to really dive in
Mm.
headfirst into my own art, my own message. And in the days following getting let go, I was just in meditation and I was like, what is next? What is the opportunity that this is showing me? What's trying to come through? And honestly, it was the this book started to come through in those next days where it was
I
like,
love that.
so it really did this book wouldn't exist without me getting fired from my corporate job and having to face the unknown and find a way to pull something out of me that could be you know, the
It is
next phase.
I love that. It's so often in those incredibly dark moments where we turn to art and art rescues us. And I mean, that's also how I made the jump. I was fired. Both of us out here just getting completely denied by the muggle world, the real world, and art saying, no, we need you over on this side of the fence. But yeah, I ended up getting fired. I mean, I had, very little money. I had a huge amount of credit card debt, and I ended up saying, okay, well, I can't pay my rent anymore. I ended up living with my partner's parents, which, was a privilege and a blessing. And it was from that space that I was able to say, well, I want to work with artists and I want to write for a living. We very slowly built up there. And I already had come from such a low income with being a waitress. So, I was able to, over maybe a year, to make back my waitress income very, slowly through ebooks. Um,
Mm.
and so yeah, it felt like the biggest win. Like I feel fortunate that I wasn't coming from like, I hadn't climbed the corporate ladder, wasn't coming from, a really well-paid job back into a very big cultural adjustment into a very lower paying artist job. I was in awe when I sold my first ebook, in awe. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, this is possible. I couldn't believe it. I was just like over the moon. And then, yeah, we were able to start making income, and it's grown each year, and yeah, it's been the most beautiful journey. I often think that we think about money tarnishing art, or that business tarnishes art, but for me, and I really love that, rewriting this story has been most holy, sacred and important journey of my life, which is art and money together, and being seen as
Yes.
valuable as an artist. And I think artists have been told that we aren't worth money and that we don't make money, and there's a lot of narratives around there. But artists have huge economic value. It's just been robbed from us and taken from us and siphoned off from us, from industries and from systems that don't want to reward the artist. They want to capture our worth. This is a big thing I'm on at the moment. I want artists to be empowered with money because we deserve it. We bring a huge amount of value to this world, huge amount of value to this world. And it's time for us to reclaim that power, reclaim that financial reward, and to own it, and to know that it doesn't dirty our art, that it can be a really, really beautiful journey.
Absolutely. I love that. So your first published book was a fiction ebook that you put together?
No, so my first published book actually was a book about journaling. So journaling really, when I was fired and I went moved back into my in-laws and I had tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt, I was so depressed. I felt so much shame. I was like, I'm a completely failed adult. And I decided to start writing every day. And I started journaling in the mornings. And I think it's been like 2000 days straight of me journaling. When I got fired, I started journaling and I've journaled every single day since April 16th, 2018. And it was the portal in which all change happened. We want to talk about the inner critic today. Like my inner critic was transformed on the pages of my journal. My narratives around being an artist were transformed on the pages of my journal. And so I wrote a book. It's now free if you want to sign up to my mailing list, just called the Journaling Compendium. And it is 31 days of journaling practice and journaling questions and just encouragement on how to journal. And yeah, it was the most beautiful thing to find so much healing in this practice, and then to write my first ever book that was sold, and yeah, to give that to the world and to give it to the world for money was beautiful.
And this was the ebook that you
Thank
sold. This is your
you.
first time selling like
Yeah,
your art.
yeah,
That's so beautiful. And I love that you started journaling as a response to losing your job. And then
yeah.
you and then
I
you
was so
turned that
alone.
you took that practice and you taught it and you put it out on as an ebook, and then that was your first foray into making money as an
So
artist.
beautiful.
Isn't that a
Such a
beautiful
lovely
transition?
circle. Yeah, it was just
Um,
stunning.
yeah, that's similar to me in terms of my first, book that I put together was an ebook, and it was a collection of blog posts that I had done. Did you ever have a blogging phase where you were like,
I've been on Instagram since 2014, so I've been tiny blogging, like
yeah,
200 words blogging since then, but I never expanded. So recently I've been doing my newsletter and really allowing myself to be in that slightly longer phase of like writing 600, 700 words, which has been lovely. But no, I never was
yeah.
an old school blogger.
Yeah, it shows just so anyone who's listening to this, just you don't have to start with something huge. Like any one foot in front of the other. Like I felt so good putting together, I had been writing blogs on WordPress or whatever, but then I just compiled the best ones into a little ebook that I designed, and I put it I think what I did was I like in exchange for like an email, it was like an email, I started to build an email list. So you just, email list, and then you can download the free PDF. So it was very simple, but I still remember that, and like it felt like, oh,
Yeah.
I put together this thing that I released and people are reading it. And I didn't make any money from it, and it didn't get me, a book deal or anything like that. But I just remember it did give me the confidence of like, oh, I just released this. I self-published it, and like it's out there. And then it's like you feel courageous enough to do a bigger thing, and then even
Yeah.
a bigger thing. So just those little steps, even if it's
Yeah.
something that's not going to make you a lot of money, or not a lot of people are going to find it, there is an emotional value in taking those steps, and they will lead you to the next phase of your creative journey.
Yeah, you are so creatively wise. And I feel like several things came up for me there. The first thing was, do you know, it took me such a long time to put an ebook out because my ego said, no, you have to be chosen. You have to be picked by a publisher. You cannot do this on your own. Only an ebook. Like, this is so unromantic. Where's the physical form? Like, I was in my own way for so long, and I thought the systems were, and the systems are always going to be getting in our way, and they're always going to be something we have to navigate. But it was me that was saying, you can't put out an ebook. That's ridiculous. That's so, like, what is that? I almost felt like it was a sign that I was failing, but it was the beginning of my complete and utter creative like revolution. And I had to step out of my way. I had to stop saying that I had to go so big straight away. Like these tiny steps were my ascension. And I think it's just so easy to ignore and to dismiss the tiny steps as being beyond you, or you want to do something bigger. It's just they are the steps to all of our creative ascension, and we really have to come face to face with our ego in those moments, because they can and it's out in a critic as well. Like they can really put up quite a big fuss about it all.
Absolutely. But there's also something about like just building stamina, and like it, those little habits on a daily basis. Like I remember like when I first started hosting events, like it was just a couple years ago, I started hosting these open mics here in Austin. And like 10 people would come at first, and I was kind of nervous to do it too. Just I mean, it wasn't a big deal, but and there was only like 10 people, but I was still just like had to work myself up. Okay, I'm going to go hold space
Yeah.
for this group. And you know, fast forward a couple years, like the last one that we did, we're in a bigger venue now, and we had almost 100 people there.
Wow.
And it's
So
like,
beautiful.
and I'm like reflecting back, and it's like, well, holding space for this room full of 100 people would not have been possible if I hadn't done it for the 10 people when I
Yeah.
was nervous to do it. So it's like it's just like building up the endurance and
Mhm.
the capability to do it. So you it's not only is it okay to start small, it's like it's useful.
Imperative.
It's imperative to start small because you're building up that endurance to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I often speak about this and say, I owe everything to the woman who tried to do a workshop and only got two people. I owe everything to her. Like she is why I am where I am. And I owe everything to, I tried to make an online course and it didn't sell. I owe everything to her. And no, it didn't make me any money, but it also did make me money because it was part of my journey and it
Yep.
was part of how I made the next course. And it is an incredibly important and integral part of my success, my creative success. I owe everything to the girl who desperately wanted to create and was trying to find a way to do it while she was waitressing. And she thought it was hopeless and she thought that she was failing, but I am in like complete awe of her because she kept going, kept creating, kept taking baby steps. And I think we forget that. And I often like to invite people to think about your future self looking back at you now and saying, I owe everything to you. I owe all of our creative magic because of what you are doing right now. And I am so thankful because I think, especially when we are taking baby steps, it can feel very unimpactful and unglamorous, but your future self owes everything to you right now. And they are so grateful that you are showing up in the way that you are.
100%. Who are you're into stories, and like stories are your first like things that to kind of capture your imagination as a young
Mm.
girl. Um, I love the idea of being part of a creative lineage. And like,
Oh,
you
I
know, I
love
think it's
that.
so important. It's like our influences are so, I just, you know, I wouldn't be who I am without not only the younger version of myself, like you said, but with also without
Mm.
those guides that I encountered when I was young that kind of oriented me on my path as an artist.
Yeah,
So like, who
beautiful.
are some of the people that were your biggest influences that really inspired you to go down this path?
It's an amazing question. I mean, the really big turning point for me was, and so many creatives have the same guiding light, which is Julia Cameron, because she led me to journaling, and journaling was where I found myself,
Mhm.
and and I needed to find me because at the end of the day, like no one was going to navigate that through without, I had to find that inner light within myself. So Julia Cameron led me there. Julia Cameron also let me forgive myself in many ways. The compassion she has for creatives completely stands against a lot of the narratives we've been sold about how it's embarrassing to pursue creativity and how, it was a shame for me to, to be in debt and to have no money. Like she really stands against so much of that cultural baggage that we have. And so when I found her, when I had been fired, it was a real turning point. And I clung to her like a creative godmother. But even earlier than that, I was completely and utterly changed by the Lord of the Rings, the movies and the books. And that for me was a real story that I didn't know what to do with my little self. Like I was 11, I think, when I watched those movies, and I like finished it and I was like, I didn't know how to alchemize that. But I think very slowly over years, and to this day, I alchemize the complete enchantment I had for that story into my own storytelling. And the fact that, yeah, that I could feel that way after consuming art. I was like, I want to make people feel like that. And so, yeah, Tolkien in that way was, I was completely enamored. I still don't know what to do with the feeling after I watched those movies. I was obsessed.
Yeah. Do you ever think about writing scripts for
So
movies?
I was doing a workshop with my creative community. We were talking about 1 year, 5 year, 10 year plans. And 10 years are always really hard. It's hard to know where we are. And I think creatives, we take such strange paths. It can be hard to see what's coming like over a decade
Sure.
in the future. But I know that wherever I'm at, like I'd love to start writing scripts eventually. I'd love to be able to tell stories on screen. And that was really exciting to say out loud, because I'm definitely like, I've still got so many novels left in me to write. I've got so many stories, and I love writing fiction. But I know that, yeah, I would love to get to do something like that, and to see it visually would be so beautiful.
So I know you write historical fiction. Do you have a
Yeah.
particular, is there a particular period or region that you focus on,
Yeah.
or do you just
I
do you invent
do.
do you like to create different worlds in different places?
Yeah, so I mean, my first book that I ever wrote was actually fantasy, and it was really born from Lord of the Rings, but I never published her, and she was definitely more of my teacher. And then I went to uni and I studied medieval history, and I specialized, and this is a bizarre specialization, I specialized in sex culture and medieval pornography. And it's just the most wild, wild world. And what I love about studying basically sexuality in the 16th, 15th centuries, and I focus primarily on England and Italy, is that we are so the same. Like, we've been drawing dick pics on like the side of the road since forever. And I think that is so amusing. And a lot of my books really explore like human sexuality and human expression and intimacy throughout the years. And so, yeah, I was like, I had this just incredible amounts of primary sources and stories from literal history. Like, people are so funny, and we've been funny for so long, and I wanted to tell them, they wanted to tell these stories. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been using that degree really as the basis of my fiction.
Fun. So there's an element of eroticism to it.
There definitely is. Yeah. Yeah. It's a little spicy.
Fun. What do you what do you like writing better, fiction or nonfiction? Do you have a
I
preference, or are
love
they just different?
it. Depends on my mood. I've just had a huge period of doing it solely nonfiction, and I'm desperately like, I need to be done, because I can find it to be a little more intensive. I can get more tired when I write nonfiction. It has to make a lot more sense. And I feel like with fiction, when you get bored, you can just go a completely different direction. There's a lot more fluidity and flexibility in writing fiction. But then again, you have to make your stories make some sort of coherent sense as well. So it's really depending on my mood. But I love them
Mhm.
both in very different ways. They're like two different children I have, and they are so different.
Yeah, that resonates with me because, like we were saying before this call, that I we both write nonfiction. We both write like nonfiction about creativity. But for you, your kind of first art was historical fiction, and mine was
Mm,
poetry. So I feel very much the same about I started writing poetry at 14 years old, and like, wrote 1,000 poems before I turned 20, basically.
wow.
And I haven't had as much time for poetry lately, but there's more of a it's more of an expression from the soul, whereas
Mm,
like nonfiction, I feel like I'm teaching or I'm educating or I'm, you know,
mm.
it's a different part of the brain, but I do love them both.
Yeah, me too.
Do
I'm
you
grateful that I get to do both.
yeah, what is your writing process? Do you have a writing process that you stick to, or is it look different every day?
Yeah, so I'm pretty consistent with my fiction, and I make sure that I prioritize my fiction. And as I was saying to you before, James, that I have to write my fiction in order to be able to talk about my creativity. So that's my I have to keep writing. Like, that's my art. And even though my creative work is incredibly, like, it is art as well, like, I really feel like I learn the most when I'm in my books. So in the morning I journal. As I said, I journal every day. And then I do, if I'm in a first
Is that
draft of a
morning
process,
pages? Is that morning pages, or is that just is that like
I've adapted my morning pages. I do one A4 page.
you do what? Say that again?
Just one A4 page. Julia Cameron prescribes 3 pages.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they're my morning pages,
Just a
but they're
br
just a bit shorter.
a mind dump.
Yeah, I just stream of conscious.
Yep.
And then I take care of myself a lot. Like, I really rewrite that in a critic. Like, I'm incredibly compassionate to myself on the pages, to make sure that I really start my day with, on my own side, so that I can do really fucking cool shit.
They're almost
So
it's almost affirmations.
kind of, yeah, it's like, yeah, I guess it is. It's affirmation work, like, what did I write today? I am so fucking proud of you. I know you're gonna make impact. I know you're gonna show up in the way that you always do, which is so beautiful. Like, really like just like my own biggest cheerleader. Like it's like I'm meeting with myself, and all I do is I'm just like, you are so fucking excellent at what you do. And I'm so excited to see how the day unfolds for you. And I want you to trust that you are on the path and that you are doing exactly what you're meant to be doing. And yeah, that's how I always end at least my journaling
Cool. So
sessions.
you
I let
start
myself
off by
bitch.
you're just pumping yourself up.
Yeah, so it just gives me like, I want to be on my own side. And for so many of us, creatives are not on their own side, and we're at a constant war of trying to create, but also trying to fight the fact that we don't like ourselves, and that we're constantly telling ourselves, belittling ourselves, that we are not enough. So the pages were really where I became my own biggest cheerleader. And that obviously it was transformational for my art to actually back myself in that way. So I always journal, and then I write 500 words of fiction if I'm in a first draft. And it can be so shit. Like it just has to be 500 words. Sometimes
Every
I might bring it down, but
every day?
every 5 days, 5 days a week.
Cool. So you always have a fiction project going on.
Yeah, I always have a fiction project going on.
Is it always the same one, or do you jump around from different projects?
I can jump. So at the moment, like I'm finishing a detective novel, but I'm also working on a very different for me sci-fi novel with my partner. We're co-writing a book. So I jump from that to that on like a day-to-day basis, depending whether I feel like editing or writing.
Gotcha. So one's in the writing stage, the other one's further developed, so it's editing, which are
Yeah,
very different parts of the
exactly.
brain. It's a very
Very different
different
parts of the
parts of the
brain. Yeah.
brain.
So I'll just choose one, but I have to do a fiction 5 days a week. That's
Cool.
just my practice.
So
Yeah.
is this journaling and writing, is this first thing in the morning? Is this right when you get up, or like what time of day is
Yeah.
this?
It's right when I get up. I make James go get me, my partner, go make me coffee. He brings it. He's also a writer, which is an incredible combination. Like he goes and writes his books. I go write mine.
Do you guys write similar types of books?
No, he writes very different types of books. Well, I'm writing a sci-fi with him now. I really went to his genre. So he writes more sci-fi
Gotcha.
fantasy.
And you read each
But
other's
yeah,
you read each other's
yeah, we
drafts
read each
and
other's
stuff?
books. Yeah, as I've just gone through the big process of writing this nonfiction book in the last 3 months, James comes in right behind me and he edits chapter by chapter. It's been a really interesting like dynamic in our relationship.
Wow. What a partnership.
Yeah, it's been
Um,
incredible.
so you have coffee. Are you listening to music, or like what's that like?
Actually, I'm a bit of an ASMR girl, which is one of
Mm.
my I really like just the sound, like small sounds, like so I don't feel so alone. So whether that's like someone typing on a keyboard or someone like just talking softly, like I like having presence, which is yeah, one of my niche loves, but I really love ASMR.
So just like while you're writing, you just have a little bit of a background noise,
Yeah,
something gentle.
exactly. Someone either whispering or talking or someone brushing someone's hair. Really,
You know,
really unusual, but really
oh my
soothing to me.
goodness, that's so funny. I've
Yeah.
never heard that before. What a couple weeks ago, I interviewed Layla Dalia, and
Yeah.
she said that what she listens to, especially if she's feeling writer's block, she listens to the sound of flowing water.
Oh,
Just
gorgeous.
water,
Flow.
because you think about
Literal
it,
flow.
it's the flow, and it gets the brain
Mm,
thinking in terms of flow, 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 and just let it
beautiful.
go.
I love that.
So 500, you said 500 words of fiction?
Yeah, so if I'm in a writing phase, it will be 500 words. It's what I call I have a bare minimum. That's all I have to do. I can do more,
Yeah.
but I just have to do 500. I also have a bare maximum because I feel like creatives, when we're in flow state, often we can burn ourselves out by going too hard in the moment when we feel really good. So I'll never write more than 1,000 words. I very rarely get there. I'm a real bare minimum girly, but if I am feeling really good, I make sure I cap myself so that I don't go too hard, because the amount of beautiful, beautiful authors and creatives of all types that when they feel really good, they get like 9 to 5 it, and then they're done for like months.
What about research? I mean, when you're writing historical fiction, that requires a lot
Yeah.
of research. Where does that factor in?
I'm so grateful that I have this background and this degree that I have in like I have such a good basis of it. But obviously, yeah, I come up with a huge amount of research that needs to happen, but I actually make sure that I don't really get too tangled up in it, especially in a first draft. So I tend to write the story and then flag research needs when I write the story.
Sure.
I have a good enough basis that I know I'm not going too rogue, but there'll always be, multiple notes on the pages saying, do they have this? Do they use it like this? Do they drink this? And I have to go back and figure that out.
That's good. So you don't let it stop your flow. You just kind of know like a research is required for this point, but you just
Mhm. Yeah.
you keep going.
Keep working.
You
Yeah.
don't let it stall you. I like that.
Yeah, I see too many creatives, and it was me included at the beginning, who, 6 months to a year researching, and it just, or even longer, and it's always, oh, I'm still in the research phase, I'm still in the research phase, and it's a very legitimate form of procrastination. She's sneaky.
Right.
And
Because
we need to be
because it
careful
feels
about that.
important. It feels
It feels
important to do the
super
research,
important. It
but it's
feels
actually
super
stopping
important.
you from just going because
Exactly.
the research isn't going to dictate the story arc. It's the
Exactly.
details. It's not the concept. So don't, yeah.
You got
So
to be
do you,
careful.
yeah, I bet. Do you, because I don't write fiction, so I'm fascinated by this.
Mm.
Like, how much of the story do you have mapped out in your head, like outlined, or are you kind of discovering the narrative as you go?
Yeah, so this is so unique, and there's not a right answer for any fiction author here. I think it's so about who you are. I wrote this detective novel not knowing who the murderer was. I just discovered it as I wrote. And that was really fun. I haven't done that before. Like, I really just like raw dogged it. I had no idea. And so that was amazing, especially for something that was mysterious and like unfolding. Like, I found like I found clues along the way that I got to uncover,
Yeah,
which was beautiful. And I loved that. But for other ones, I've had more of like a beginning, middle, end, and I'll let myself kind of find the in-betweens by myself in the writing process, but I'll have like places I want to get to that kind of tether me so that I'm not completely lost along the way. But then
absolutely.
my partner, James, he is so detailed. Like, he knows everything that's going to happen in his book. So it is really depending on the author.
I'm just gonna comment because there's some questions in the chat. We're gonna get to
Yeah.
questions in a minute. I just wanna we're gonna finish the interview and then we're gonna jump into questions. So we'll get to that.
Can't wait.
What is so you're also pretty prolific on social media,
Mm.
on Instagram. You make, very, it's inspiration for artists and affirmations. Where do you find time for your social media content? Is that a different process for you, or is that
Yeah, I wish
where do
I
you fit
had a
that in?
really good answer for you. I always create and then post straight away. So I'm not prepping. It's always very in the moment. I create every day, basically. So there's always something that I can come home to, some little nugget that I'm watching for. Like, I feel like I've trained my brain just after practice to really be noticing what's happening for my own creative process. And then I'm now very good, because I've done it for 10 years, at alchemizing whatever thought I'm having around creativity into a smaller post. I think people who are, especially writers on social media, we can get really good at alchemizing big thoughts into very distilled uh, like captures of the process. So that's what I do. I basically always create it in the evenings or in the afternoons after a day of being an artist. And yeah, it's become just a beautiful practice, and I love it. And I was writing this morning actually in my journal. I'm like, I feel a bit of shame for how easeful I find creating content and creating art for social media, because I know it's something that a lot of creatives struggle with. But I've found that I've kind of surrendered to it. Not every post has to hit, just every post has to be vulnerable and true to my process. And I've gotten to a pattern of sharing that feels really great.
So you're almost reflecting back on your day, because like
Yeah.
every day you're being a writer, every day you're being an
Yeah.
artist, and you're just kind of reflecting back on what you dealt with, what you learned that day, and then you're just
100%.
reflecting that back to your audience.
Yeah, I just wrote here. It was in my journal that I found this post this morning, and I'll post it soon. It says, I trust that I never need to catch up, nor am I ever running behind. An artist is always on time. And that was just because I had this like sudden panic of like, my God, I'm like, I'm away at the moment. I'm with family, and I'm not being as much on board. Like, I've been writing. I'm like, oh my God, when I get back, I need to catch up. I need to, I'm running behind. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I am always on time. We as creatives are always on time, and there's absolutely no need to catch up or to feel like, I need to chase. Like, exhale, like, this is perfect, it's all unfolding as it must. That was just what I wrote in my journal, and so then I alchemized it a little bit and distilled it, and I'll
Yeah.
share that in a minute.
So it sounds like your personal affirmation practice in the morning, like you're writing these messages for
Mm,
yourself in your
yeah,
journal, but then you end up maybe you rephrase them slightly,
yeah,
but
exactly.
you're sharing your own personal affirmations for yourself, but then
Yeah,
you're bringing them to the public and offering them to the world
yeah,
to take as their own affirmation.
yeah, it's been such an amazing thing. And all my posts are always for me first, they're what I need to hear, and we are just so connected, and we are creatives move through so many similar experiences that it also happens that we can share them and be with each other in them.
Yeah. I feel like, do you feel like, I don't know. I was thinking about this because I've been thinking a lot about, social media content and writing and things like this. And it seems like, writing for fiction and writing for social media, it feels very different. But at the same time, because like, obviously a fiction book is long form, there's lots of
Mm.
sentences. Social media is short, it's quick, it's bite-sized.
Mhm.
But I realized that like some of the best content on social media, it's so direct. And it's like one thing you learn about when you learn about writing, especially fiction, you learn about how to use this like active voice. It's like,
Yeah.
so even though like a book has tons of sentences,
Mm.
really each one should be direct and to the point and active. And
Mm.
it's almost like Hemingway is kind of like the gold standard for this kind of writing, where it's like short
Mm.
sentences that are almost like each one is it's so direct. And I feel like
Yeah.
that applies to social media content, where it's just a just direct transmission of thought, and it's not
Mm.
getting too flourishy with it. It's just like
It's
as
clarity.
clearly as you can communicate the idea, the better.
Mm. Yeah, that's the skill social media gives you. It's clarity. It's distilling big thoughts into really active, poignant, and powerful pieces of art. And that I'm so grateful for social media giving me that gift, because it's made me a better fiction author for sure.
How has it affected your fiction, do you think?
It's a really great question. I mean, in so many ways, social media has allowed me to take up space as a leader, and like in an emotional and like personal way, social media has allowed me to take up space as an artist and to speak as an artist and to speak as an author, which was always going to feed into my fiction, because it gives me, a feeling of authority. Like I am here to write and I am here to tell stories, and I stop being so apologetic in the way that I write. Like I really just write, especially because I'm writing like saucy books. Like you can't shy away from that. Like you have to take up space. So in that way, social media has really served me. But also I think it has given me just I'm working with words, and I've worked with words every day for 10 years, like distilling words, distilling ideas. And so there is clarity there that I've definitely can translate to my fiction.
Yeah. What do you do with all your because your social media content, it's really cool because there's a lot of like handwritten social media posts, but you'll often like it looks like you paint some of your
Mm.
affirmations onto canvas.
Yeah, yeah. I
Do-
went through a Canvas stage and I'm excited to come back. At the moment, I'm on like whatever I can find, like cookie wrappers space, but the Canvas space is really fun, and I've got them all. And sometimes I gift them to people, but they're just sitting in my workspace all around me, which I love. And one day I'd love to have like an exhibition of them all.
Totally. I mean, I
Yeah.
bet people would buy them. I bet you could just
Oh,
put
thanks,
those. No, seriously. I bet you
James.
could put those because it's just like a piece. I love. Well, I'm a collector. I collect
Yeah,
like I have autographs and like different pieces of memorabilia from some of my favorite authors and first
I love
editions and
that.
things like that. So I bet
Mm.
your fans would love to have like, one of
Thank you.
your
Yeah,
hand
one day I
painted
would love to do that.
affirmations on the wall. So what do I know that and we're a couple more questions and then we'll open this up to the audience, but like I know one of the things you do is like a creative teacher, a creative coach, and you teach
Mm.
classes and things like this. What are some of the roadblocks and challenges that you see creatives consistently face?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge conversation. I mean, the biggest ones that I see most regularly is perfectionism and procrastination, which are so intimately linked.
Hmm.
Just the constant inability to face ourselves because we are afraid we are not enough. And there's nothing we do as humans that is more vulnerable than making art. I really, really believe that. It is the most vulnerable action we take as creatives, as human beings. And so when we face ourselves in those spaces of vulnerability, and we've been taught that we have to show up a certain way, we have to be a certain standard. It's the way perfectionism it is rife, and it is so painful to see so many creatives not be able to move through with their art, not to be able to finish projects, not to be able to start projects because they are so afraid that they won't fulfill under these very ridiculous expectations.
Do
As
you
you said at the beginning.
do you still feel that way about your own art sometimes? Or how did you get over that? How did you allow yourself to flow and be prolific and post regularly with that inner critic still there?
Mm. I realized that my magic, like when I'm at my best, is when I'm at my messiest. And I befriended mess and chaos in a way that became addictive. Because I realized what I could do when I let go of perfection. And I think this is really at the heart of so many artists is like, you have no idea what you could give if you let yourself be incredibly messy. And we think that perfection is going to be what takes us to the heights of our creative abilities, but it is holding us back in such a profound way. Like, and if you actually let yourself be shit and make shitty art and be messy and be chaotic, you would discover shit art, don't get me wrong, but you would also discover the most profound art within it. And it is, and I started allowing myself to make bad stuff, and within the bad I found just magic, and I became addicted. I was like, mess is my magic, and I was like, what could I find next? And I just was in this pattern of like, if I just let myself go and make all this crap and just let myself just stop with these restraints, what else will I find? And again, there is a lot of crap, but there's also so much magic. And that process for me just became, as I said, like became addictive. I was so excited by what I could find if I just finally let go of this illusion of perfection.
I love that so much, and I see a lot of resonating in the comments as well. What does it look like? I can see that on social media because like you're just like everything's very hand drawn and kind of messy. How does it
Yeah.
apply to your fiction? Is that just about like making stuff up and just being taking twists and turns that seem absurd, or how does it how or just like not caring about the grammar in your sentences? How do you let
Mm.
yourself be messy in fiction?
I don't reread for the whole first draft. I will change character names. I will change ideas. I'll be like 40% of the way through and I'm like, I don't like the last plot point. So I'll just start writing it as though I wrote another plot point. Like, there's no coherence. If you've tried to read that first draft, it wouldn't make any sense. Like, I let myself play like a child in that first draft. Spelling and grammar can go fuck themselves, and they can go fuck themselves right until the end. I get someone else to deal with that because I'm so bad at it, but nothing's holding me back from new ideas. Like I don't have to be beholden to one idea when I write fiction. I don't have to
Yeah.
even be beholden to historical truth.
Yeah.
And I am a very anachronistic writer, so I have a very modern tone of voice, and some people fucking hate it, but I love it. And I really enjoy having this very like modern linguistics within this very old world. And for me, like there were no rules. I could do what I wanted.
Oh,
And
so
some
for
people
some people would
absolutely
think that
love
you're
it.
some people might think you're not being true to the
Oh
era
yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
speaking in modern language when it's
Yeah.
about it, but you're really just kind of blending styles in a
I'm just
way too.
playing. I'm just having a
Yeah.
really good time. And some people love it.
I love the freedom of the first draft being messy. I think and I this is how I frame it is, when you talk about being messy to like let it out, what I refer to that as in my poetry at least is just following intuition. Just like whatever the
Mm,
intuition directs me to do, I just do it and I don't worry
mm.
about if it all fits, if it I don't fact check it, yet. I just let it out as an
Yeah,
instinct.
I
And
love
then
that.
and then what I say is I to get the ego out of the way to let me to create, I give my ego a different job, meaning I know there'll be another chance to
Mm,
edit and to
mm.
make it all fit later on. So I don't put pressure on that first draft to be perfect, you know, I- to be anything because I love
Yeah.
the phrase it's easier to fix bad pages than no pages. So
Oh my
just
God, of
getting it out
course.
with complete freedom and open those floodgates, that's such an important phase. And then you can go back and fix them and edit them later.
100%. And I also like to remind writers that my second draft's really bad too. And my third draft can be absolute horseshit as well. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter, you just keep going.
Awesome. So let's take a few questions from the audience. There's one in here. If anyone else has any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But let's start with this one. So Amie, how did you find a market for your writing and art?
Yeah, a beautiful question that I'm still, as always, in the midst of discovering. Um, I've found a market for my nonfiction by just sharing what it was like to be a creative and sharing a lot and letting myself be seen and taking up space unapologetically and saying, this is my experience as a creative, and I'm really struggling in this space. Has anybody else ever seen themselves in me? And that was it's been 10 years of sharing like that on Instagram. And I know for some people that can feel really disheartening because it's a long time to be sharing and to be building an audience. But I've built an audience, I would say, relatively slowly over 10 years, consistently and slowly, but just building trust and building relationships over time. And I think so many of us want audiences immediately with a viral post. They just swarm in, but they don't know you after that sort of swarm of community. And I feel like a blessing of my journey has been very slowly over time building connection with authors and creators and letting them see me and letting them trust me, so that when I had my journaling compendium after 7 years of creating and I said, I have something for you now, there was a long relationship there, and they knew who I was and they'd seen my journaling journey and they knew that they could trust me. And so they wanted to invest in that book. So for the nonfiction, it's been, a long, beautiful journey of creating relationship. For my fiction, this is still a big journey. I self-published my fiction. I mean, they've done really beautifully well, especially for self-pub, because it can be hard to get that reach. It has been taking up space with it. And this is something I really have to work on, because my fiction isn't as big as my nonfiction. So it's harder for me to take up space in this way. But I let people know about it. I talk about it. I get it into book clubs. Again, I'm just trying to find her people, my book's people. There's a real like edge and like, I don't know, like rebelliousness to my books. Like my second book is called Regrettably, I'm About to Cause Trouble. And so finding those people who just love to fuck around and find out, and who love stories and who love play, like it is a long journey, and I'm so excited to keep going on it. But where do those people live? Like, where are they hiding? Where are they being? And going and finding them and talking to them.
Beautiful. Any other questions for either of us? Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me too, like social media is the quickest answer for how I found an audience. And even on social media, I experimented with so many different styles, and
Oh yeah,
I have
same.
different, you can go back through my Instagram through the years and see different phases, right? Like
Yeah,
I used to
I
just,
love doing that.
I used to draw little cartoons, and I have little
Oh, I
like,
love
they
that.
were almost like my early memes, but they were hand drawn and just like little like
Mm,
captions, and like people like stick figures talking to each other, things like that.
I
And
love that.
then and then those are my earliest versions of memes. And then when I started making memes is when my like you said, posts started to go viral and things like that. And even then, I
Mm,
would grow a viral audience on memes. But like you said, they didn't know me; they just liked my
yeah.
memes, so they followed me. But then I had to
To build relationship.
start teaching classes and put myself out
Mm,
there and do reels, so I'm not
mm,
just like an anonymous meme page, but no, it's
yeah,
me, and I'm an author and I teach and all these things. So it's looking back, it was such a meandering journey, and like
beautiful.
experimenting with different styles and techniques, and
Mm.
the trumpet player Miles Davis has a great quote. He says, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself.
Oh, I love that. It does. It takes time to find our voice, especially when we have so many inputs and narratives that will squash it. And discovering that, pulling back the crap and just letting ourselves be seen takes time.
Absolutely. So let's see, one more question here. How does your major at uni inform your work?
I mean, it's the basis of all my research. So really, these stories of these, a lot of, I mean, it's stories of everyone, but a lot of stories about women, primary sources and like law records, like they're literally in my books, like a lot of their characters. And one of my favorite things to talk about is like, I love it when someone mentions a part of my fiction. I'm like, that's true. That really happened. That really happened. They're just littered with real people and real events. And it's so much fun. So it deeply sits underneath it all.
That's great. What I love about that is like it's history, but like like no one really knows this history, and it allows you to conjure elements of the story that you couldn't have come up with on your own. It's like it gives
No,
you
I love it.
like history is full of these little tidbits that you can adapt and incorporate, which makes it rooted in reality, but it also
Yeah.
gives you plot elements that you yourself would not have come up with otherwise.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I feel like I'm in collaboration actual humans, who lived and had stories. And I love that it's such a privilege to get to tell their stories.
I love that. Okay, here's another
Mm.
question. This is for both of us. So, Amy, do you pay attention to the algorithm on
Mm.
Instagram?
I do, but she's not my boss. I know what I want to create, and I know that I have a long career ahead on this app, so I need to make sure it's sustainable and enjoyable for myself. So I'll notice things, but for example, I don't really make reels. My static work does just as good. Not if not, no, it doesn't do just as good. My static does so much better than any reel I create. So we get a lot of noise about what does and doesn't do well on Instagram, and I don't know that there's a lot of worth in following them or changing the way you create to abide with these rules that change so quickly anyway.
Yeah.
You got to find something that works for you that you can do consistently. Something that I do notice is that they do like the consistency. I haven't posted recently for 4 or 5 days, and you see growth slow and everything slow. So I am consistent, but it means that I need to make it joyful consistency. I need to make sure the practice is feeling good for me.
Honestly, I love that term, joyful consistency. I love that term because I always tell people if you're not having fun, if you don't love to do it, it's not going to work.
Oh
It's
my
got to be
God.
fun. It's got to be
Yeah.
fun because we're talking about a lifestyle. Like
Yeah.
being an artist or just, you know, being a content creator, it is a lifestyle. It is a commitment.
Hmm.
And if it's a drag, that's going to come across in the work. You got to love it. You have to find a style that works for you. Like there are some people go viral for things that are completely in one direction, and some people go viral for some things that are completely in another direction, and they seem to be and like that data is like contradictory.
Exactly. It's ridiculous.
So it's not
I'm so
about
tired of
chasing
people telling
trends.
you what to do. Yeah. Just
So
like you have to figure it out yourself. What do you love to do? Because you'll feel it. You're still
yeah,
communicating with humans on this app. I think people forget that. Like, I think we feel like we're feeding it to some sort of machine that will decide everything, but we are essentially sharing with humans, and humans can feel when you're fucking excited about what you're sharing. And I think that's
absolutely.
important. Mm.
Absolutely. And I would just add like the algorithm is only the algorithm is there's lots of factors and a lot of them are a mystery, but it has to do with the reaction that your posts are getting from people, right?
Mm.
So it's not it is like this, technical algorithm, but it's based on reactions from people. So,
Mm.
you know, it is about the feedback you're getting from real people. So it is at the end of the day, the algorithm is about how it's being received by your audience. So there's no right or wrong way to do it, but there's a good feedback like there because just certain things, there's certain art that doesn't work well for social media. Like like I write poetry, right? Like if I like break up a poem that I think is great into a carousel with a bunch of words on every post, some people are going to take the time to really read it and love it, right? But I know that's going to be a minority because that's just not the right content for the medium, right? People
Mm.
want to read poetry in a book. So I do that in contradiction to the algorithm because I want to take the time to share something that's like maybe it's deeper in a way, but it's not going to perform as well. And I know that.
Yeah, and you choose that.
And I choose that.
Mm.
But there are certain ways of writing and certain stylistic elements that just work well for social
Mm.
media, and it's about having that consistent style and your consistent tone of voice, and like we were saying earlier, being direct and to the point and pithy and saying
Mm.
things that matter, saying things that people care about. That's the best thing you can do is saying things that people care about. So
Mm.
I'm always asking myself, what do I care about so much that I have to express this? And if it means
Mm.
a lot to me, it's going to mean a lot to others. And then you find your tribe, you find your people.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I agree.
it's helpful to know how the algorithm works, but you don't want to compromise your voice or your style to be like anyone else.
Mm. Yeah, I love that.
All right, you guys, thank you all for joining today. This is so
Thank
fun.
you. So grateful.
Amy, it was so fun to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to leave us with one of the little poem illustrations in The Art of You. And this starts with forget perfection. Forget perfection. The process is more important than the results. Drop expectations, mess it up, have fun, get lost. Make things with the careless abandon of a child. Jump in before you're ready. Start now. It's not about being good at creativity. It's about creativity being good for you.